The boy's gurney was already moving down the hallway when I looked at the chart in my hand and felt the floor shift beneath me. His name was right, but the diagnosis wasn't his. Behind me, down the other corridor, a different child was sitting in a bed untouched, still waiting for the surgery that was supposed to save his life. I had maybe 30 seconds before the anesthesiologist made a decision that couldn't be undone. Before we go back to that morning, tell me in the comments, have you or someone you love ever felt like just a number inside a hospital? Drop your name and your city. You might be more connected to this story than you think. The smell of Whitmore Children's Hospital at 6 in the morning was something. I had memorized over 22 years of early shifts, antiseptic layered over cafeteria coffee, with something underneath that no cleaning crew could ever fully scrub away. The faint metallic trace of worry that had soaked into the walls. That Monday, the moment I stepped through the automatic doors, I knew the day was already broken. 3 nurses had called out sick. The pediatric floor was running on for staff members covering 12 rooms. And the charge nurse, a woman named Sandra Kell, 29 years on the job, always steady, was moving at a pace I had never seen from her before, and she was someone who never ran. I had come in early to review 2 cases scheduled back-to-back for that morning, a 7-year-old named Lucas Hartman, who needed a minor procedure to remove a benign growth near his left ear, and a boy named Liam Hartley, 8 years old, who was in for an appendectomy that could not wait another day. 2 children, similar ages, similar names. Both checked in the evening before, both on the same floor, both flagged for morning prep. I remember thinking, briefly, that someone should double the verification process. I remember choosing not to say it out loud because the floor was already stretched and I did not want to add one more thing to Sandra's morning. Sandra had been on since 11 the night before. I did not know that yet. What I saw was a competent professional moving fast through a corridor stacked with open charts, unanswered call lights, and a medication cart that had not been restocked. What I did not see, what none of us saw, was that behind her efficiency was a woman running on for hours of sleep spread across 2 days, covering a shift that had been left empty because the hospital had not replaced a nurse who resigned 6 weeks prior. The position was still listed as under review. The floor had been short ever since. The 216, separated by a shared supply closet and a nurse's station that morning had no one sitting at it. Lucas's parents, the Hartmans, had brought him a small stuffed dog and were trying to keep the mood light, asking him questions about his favorite cartoons to stop him from fixating on the 4 in his arm. Liam's mother, a woman named Carol Hartley, was alone. Her husband had driven back home to get their daughter ready for school, promising to return before Liam went in. She was sitting in the chair beside his bed with her coat still on, as though she had decided that if she never fully settled in, the fear would stay manageable. I passed both rooms during my early walkthrough and said the usual things, reassurances that were true but also rehearsed. The kind of words you say so many times they stop costing you anything to give. I checked in with Sandra at the nurse's station at 6:42. She handed me 2 chart folders without looking up, told me prep was on schedule, and turned back to the computer screen where 3 alerts were blinking simultaneously. I took the charts. I did not look at them immediately. And that I would think about for a long time afterward, the moment I held the answer in my hands and set it aside. It was sometime between 6:50 and 7:10. The window was never pinpointed exactly, and that ambiguity became its own wound during the investigation, that the charts were switched, not dramatically, not with any sound or visible mistake. Sandra had pulled both folders to update pre-op notes, set them down side by side on the counter to answer a call light, and when she returned, she picked them up in the wrong order. That was it. That was the entire catastrophe. 2 folders, a counter, 30 seconds of divided attention in a hallway where divided attention was the only kind available. By 7:15, The morning had the dangerous, deceptive quality of a shift that appears to be running smoothly. Both boys had been prepped. Both sets of parents had signed consent forms, or so the floor believed. The transport aide, a young man named Derek who had been on the job for 8 months, came to room 16 first with a gurney and a smile, told Carol Hartley that her son was next, and wheeled Liam toward the elevator without incident. Then, for minutes later, he returned for Lucas. The Hartman family watched their son go with the particular kind of forced calm that parents of sick children learn to wear like a second skin, waving from the doorway as though the cheerfulness in their faces could follow him down the hall and keep him safe. Sandra did not realize what had happened until she sat down at the nurse's station, opened the charting system to log the transport times, and saw both names on the screen at once. Hartman and Hartley, their records side by side, their procedures listed in black and white. She looked at the screen. She looked at the 2 empty folders in front of her. And then she looked at the clock. The specific way her face changed in that moment, I was not there to see it, but I heard it described by 2 different people afterward, and both of them used the same word: collapse. Not her body, her expression. Like something behind her eyes simply gave way. She picked up the phone and called the surgical floor before she had finished processing what she was looking at. Her voice, by every account, was completely flat, not panicked, not loud. Just stripped of everything except the information that needed to travel as fast as possible. "Stop prep on Hartman," she said. "The chart is wrong." "He is in the wrong room." There was a pause on the other end. Then the charge nurse on the surgical floor said, "He's already been transferred to pre-op bay 2. Sandra said, "I know." "Stop it now." She hung up and was already walking before the receiver hit the cradle. I was in the attending lounge when my pager went off. The message was 3 words and a room number. I had been in emergency medicine long enough to know that 3-word pages were never good news. They meant someone had already decided there was no time for complete sentences. I was through the stairwell door before I had finished reading it, moving up to floors towards surgical pre-op. And I will tell you exactly what I was thinking as I climbed those stairs. I was thinking about how many things had to go right simultaneously for an error like this to be caught in time, and how many of those things depended entirely on luck. In pre-op bay 2, Lucas Hartman was lying on a narrow table under warm lights, wearing a paper gown that was too big for his small frame, holding the stuffed dog he had refused to leave behind. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Patricia Vance, efficient, precise. The kind of professional who reads every line, had the chart open on the cart beside her and was reviewing it for the second time because something in the notation had struck her as slightly inconsistent with what the boy's body was showing her. She had not yet administered anything. She was 40 seconds away from doing so when Sandra's call reached the floor. 40 seconds. I have thought about those 40 seconds more times than I can count. When I walked into that bay and looked at Lucas's face, calm, unaware, holding his stuffed dog with both hands, I felt something that I rarely allowed myself to feel on the floor. A cold, spreading anger, not at Sandra. Not yet, and not ever entirely at her, once I understood the full picture. The anger was at everything that had made that morning possible, the empty chair at the nurse's station, the position that had been under review for 6 weeks, the 3 call-outs with no coverage, the culture that had trained all of us to absorb the weight of an impossible workload and keep moving without complaint, as though silence about the strain was the same thing as the strain not existing. The hour that followed the catch was, in some ways, harder than if the error had not been caught at all. Both children were safe. Both procedures were correctly rerouted. Liam's appendectomy proceeded on schedule, and Lucas was returned to his room to wait for his original minor procedure later that afternoon. Medically, The outcome was as clean as anyone in that hospital could have hoped for. But the moment the immediate crisis was resolved, a different kind of emergency began, and this one had no protocol, no checklist, no clear chain of command to follow. The Hartman family was told first. I was the one who told them. I had done difficult conversations before. I had told parents that their children were not going to recover, that the thing they had been hoping was temporary was not, and I had built, over decades, a version of steadiness that I could hold on to in those rooms. This was different. This was not a tragedy I was reporting. This was a failure I was confessing. Mr. and Mrs. Hartman listened to me in complete silence. And when I finished, Mrs. Hartman asked one question: who is responsible? I gave her the answer that was accurate: a combination of factors, a systemic breakdown, a floor running below safe capacity. And I watched her face tell me that the accurate answer was not the one she needed. She needed a name. She needed something human-sized to hold the weight of what had almost happened to her son. Sandra was removed from the floor pending investigation within the hour. Hospital protocol was clear on that point, and the administration moved quickly, which I understood as a legal necessity and resented as a human being. I had seen Sandra work for 11 years. I had seen her advocate for patients when the attending wouldn't listen, catch medication errors at 3 in the morning when no one else was awake enough to notice, hold the hands of families in the waiting room who had no one else. Removing her from the floor was the right call inside the logic of the system, inside the logic of what I knew about Sandra as a person. It felt like punishing the wrong thing entirely. What emerged over the following 24 hours, as the hospital's risk management team began its review, was a picture that none of us who worked that floor could claim to find surprising. The nursing shortage had been formally flagged twice in the previous 4 months, once in a memo from Sandra herself, once in a staffing report compiled by the floor's supervisor. Both documents existed in the system. Neither had generated a response beyond an acknowledgement of receipt. The position left vacant after the resignation 6 weeks prior had not been filled because the hiring process had been slowed by a budget review. All of it was documented. All of it was known. And still, that Monday morning had arrived for nurses covering 12 rooms. And no one from administration had been present on the floor to see what that actually looked like from the inside. The ethical weight of this, the question of where responsibility truly lived, sat in the hallways of Whitmore like something with physical mass that week. Sandra's colleagues moved around it without speaking directly about it. The union representative arrived by noon and was in closed meetings for most of the afternoon. The parents of both boys were connected with the hospital's patient advocate, which was the correct institutional response and also, I thought, a deeply inadequate one. And in the middle of all of it, Caro Hartley, Liam's mother, whose son had successfully come through his appendectomy and was recovering in room 16, stopped me in the corridor and asked if the nurse who had made the mistake was going to lose her job. When I told her I didn't know yet, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I have not forgotten. I hope they look at everything before they decide. Because when I was waiting this morning with no one to answer my questions, I saw how bad it was up here. I stood in the corridor after she walked away and thought about what it meant that a patient's family had a clearer view of the systemic failure than the people whose institution it was. I thought about the memo Sandra had written for months ago. I thought about the 40 seconds in pre-op Bay 2. I thought about the fact that on any other morning, on a morning with full staffing, with a nurse who had slept, with a counter that was not being worked by someone handling 3 emergencies at once, those 2 charts would never have touched each other. The error had a name on it. But the conditions that made it inevitable did not. The meeting happened at 4 o'clock that afternoon, in a conference room on the administrative floor that smelled of fresh coffee and recycled air, and had the particular silence of a room where difficult things were routinely decided by people who would not personally feel the consequences. The hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Hymonde Stokes, a careful man, precise in language, the kind of administrator who had spent so many years managing optics that it was difficult to tell where the management ended and the person began, had called it. Present were the floor supervisor, the head of risk management, the union representative, Sandra's direct supervisor, and me. Sandra was not in the room. She was 2 floors below, in a break room that was not being used, sitting alone with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour before. I had asked to be included in the meeting and Stokes had agreed, which I took as either a sign of respect or a calculation that having an attending physician present would make the conversation more defensible afterward. I did not ask which. I sat at the long table and listened as the risk management director walked through the timeline, the overlapping names, the understaffed floor, the unsupervised nurse's station, the 40-second window in pre-op, and presented it in the flat, structured language of institutional liability, which is a language specifically designed to make human failure sound like a weather event. Something that happened to the organization rather than something the organization had allowed to happen. When the director finished, Stokes asked the room whether the incident could be attributed to individual error or systemic failure. It was a real question, but it was also a strategic one. The answer would shape everything from Sandra's employment status to the hospital's exposure in any subsequent legal action. The floor supervisor said both, which was honest. The union representative said systemic, which was his position. The risk manager said the chart indicated a clear departure from established protocol at the individual level, which was also technically accurate. I said that both things could be true simultaneously, and that choosing one answer to protect the institution's legal position was not the same as understanding what had actually happened or ensuring it never happened again. Stokes looked at me for a long moment. He did not disagree. What I did not know when I walked into that meeting was that Sandra had already submitted a written statement, 1,200 pages, which the union rep told me about in the hallway afterward, in which she described, in precise detail, every shift she had worked in the previous 6 weeks, the number of patients per nurse on each of those shifts, the callouts with no replacement coverage, the medication cart that had not been restocked in 4 days, and the 2 formal complaints she had filed with management that had received no response. She had not written the statement to defend herself, he told me. She had written it because she wanted the record to be complete. She had written it because she knew that without a complete record, the story would be told the way institutions always tell these stories, beginning and ending with the individual at the point of error, and nothing before or after. I left the conference room without a resolution. Stokes had closed the meeting by saying the investigation would continue and that decisions regarding staffing and personnel would be communicated through appropriate channels, which was the kind of language that meant nothing was going to happen quickly. I took the stairs back down to the pediatric floor, and I walked past room 14, where Lucas Hartman was sitting up in bed eating crackers, the stuffed dog beside him, his parents on either side watching him like he might disappear if they looked away. I stopped in the doorway for a moment. Mrs. Hartman saw me and I expected the anger from the morning to still be there, compressed and waiting. Instead, she just looked at me, tired, relieved, not ready to be anything other than grateful that her son was eating crackers, and gave me a small nod that I took as both acknowledgement and the most complicated kind of forgiveness. I walked on, past the supplies between rooms 14 on 16 the nurse station where Sandra's empty chair sat with a half-finished patient log open on the counter, her handwriting still visible on the page. And I thought about the story that was going to be told about this day, about what version of it would end up in the incident report. What version would reach the parents' attorneys? What version would make it into the staff meeting next month as a cautionary example? I thought about all the things that story would leave out. And I thought about Sandra, alone in the break room 2 floors below, holding a cold cup of coffee, carrying the full weight of a morning that an entire institution had helped build and then handed to her to hold. 3 days after the incident, Whitmore Children's Hospital issued an internal statement acknowledging a procedural lapse in patient identification protocols and announcing a mandatory retraining on chart management for all nursing staff. The statement did not mention understaffing. It did not mention the 2 formal complaints that had been filed and ignored. It did not mention that the nursing position left vacant 6 weeks prior was still listed as under review. What it did announce, in the final paragraph, was that the hospital was committed to a culture of safety and continuous improvement. A sentence so perfectly constructed to mean everything and require nothing that I read it twice, just to be sure I had not missed something specific inside it. Sandra was placed on administrative leave for 14 days. The decision was framed as pending full review, but everyone on the floor understood what it was. A pause long enough for the initial intensity to settle. A way of removing the visible human face of the error from the environment while the institution decided how to proceed. Her colleagues did not speak about it openly, but I watched the floor that week and I saw what her absence actually looked like in practice. For nurses carrying 12 rooms on the days when coverage held, 3 carrying 12 on the days it didn't. The same conditions that had built the morning of the era, now simply continuing without her. Lucas Hartman's minor procedure was performed successfully on Wednesday, 2 days after the incident. His parents did not file a formal complaint in the end. Mrs. Hartman told the patient advocate that she wanted to, but that after speaking with her husband and sitting with it for a day, she found she was too tired to be angry at a system that was never going to change. That sentence was not supposed to reach me. It reached me through the patient advocate, who repeated it without realizing how completely it landed. Too tired to be angry at a system that was never going to change. I wrote it on a piece of paper and put it in my coat pocket, and I carried it around for the rest of the week like evidence. Liam Hartley recovered well. Carol Hartley came back to the floor on the day of his discharge to return a blanket they had borrowed, which was not something patients typically did, and I happened to be at the nurse's station when she arrived. She asked me directly if the nurse was going to be okay. I told her I hoped so, and that the situation was more complicated than what had been publicly acknowledged. She nodded, as though that was exactly what she had expected to hear. Then she picked up Liam's bag, helped him into his jacket, and walked him down the hall toward the elevator. At the door, the boy turned back and waved, not at me specifically, just at the floor, at the building, at all of it, and the spontaneous generosity of that small gesture from an 8-year-old who had no idea how close the morning of his surgery had come to going wrong undid something in me that I had been carefully holding together all week. Sandra returned to work on a Tuesday, 3 weeks later. The hire for the vacant nursing position had been approved, not filled. Which meant the process was beginning, which meant it would take weeks more, at minimum. The mandatory chart identification retraining was scheduled for the following month. The 2 formal complaints Sandra had filed were acknowledged in the investigation report, and a note was added to the facility's internal review record. Nothing in the environment she returned to was substantially different from the environment she had left, except that everyone on the floor knew what it was capable of now, and that knowledge sat between people without being spoken, the way knowledge of a fault line sits under a city, present, documented, waiting. I saw her on her first morning back in the corridor outside room 11, reviewing a chart with the focus of someone who was reading every single word. She looked up when I walked by, and I stopped. There was nothing adequate to say. So I said the closest thing to true that I could find. "I'm glad you're here." She held my eyes for a moment, and I could see in them everything she was not going to say: the exhaustion, the weight, the specific grief of having made a mistake in a system that had been building the conditions for that mistake for months, and would be adding her name to its incident report while continuing, largely unchanged, to build the conditions for the next one. Then she nodded, turned back to the chart, and kept reading. "If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been on either side of a moment like this, as a patient, a family member, or someone who works in healthcare, drop a comment below and tell me about it. And if you believe these stories deserve to be told, subscribe so we can keep telling them together." I have been in emergency medicine for 25 years. I have seen errors. I have made errors. I have stood at bedsides where the difference between the outcome we got and the outcome we almost got was a margin so thin it had no business being called safety. And in all of that time, the thing I have come to believe with absolute certainty is this: the most dangerous sentence in any hospital is not "I don't know." The most dangerous sentence is "we've always done it this way." What happened at Whitmore on that Monday morning was not, in the end, about 2 charts and a countertop. It was about what happens when the gap between the workload a system demands and the capacity it actually provides becomes wide enough to swallow people. And then the system, rather than measuring that gap, writes a name into the space where it should have been drawing a line. Sandra was not careless. Sandra was depleted. And there is a profound moral difference between those two things that our institutions are not yet consistently willing to make. I think about the 40 seconds in pre-op beta more often than I think is probably healthy. I think about Dr. Vance pausing over that chart, something not quite adding up, her training making her slow down when speed was expected. I think about how close that was. And I think about every floor in every hospital running on the same margins. Every overextended nurse carrying that same invisible arithmetic. How many patients? How many hours? How many decisions before something gives, and no one at the administrative level treating that arithmetic as the emergency it actually is. The 2 boys grew up fine. I know that because Carol Hartley sends a card to the floor every year at Christmas, not addressed to anyone in particular, just to the nurses of pediatric floor 7, which is exactly where it belongs. Sandra is still there. She is still one of the best nurses I have ever worked alongside. And the position that was vacant for 6 weeks, it was filled for months after the incident, after a second near miss on the same floor, involving a different nurse and a different kind of exhaustion. And the hire was announced in an internal memo that described it as part of the hospital's ongoing commitment to staffing excellence. For months, 2 near misses, 1 memo. I tell you, this story not because it ends badly. It doesn't, not entirely. I tell it because the version that almost happened is still happening, right now, in hospitals across this country. On floors that are short by 1 nurse, by 2, by the person who resigned and hasn't been replaced yet. I tell it because the systems we trust with our children's lives deserve scrutiny that goes deeper than the name on the incident report. And I tell it because somewhere, tonight, there is a nurse exactly like Sandra, competent, committed, running on for hours of sleep and an empty nurse's station, holding the line for all of us, completely alone and deserving a great deal better than what we are giving her.